All right, welcome back, everybody, to our ongoing review of the Framemaking Sale, which is now out and available for everyone around the world. And today, Carl and I wanted to share with you some really interesting perspectives that we talk about in the book around customer centricity. The thing that where we really land, I think, is really interesting is from a frame making perspective. One of the most powerful sort of lenses that you can apply to this customer centricity idea is not so much to try to be more customer centric, which almost inevitably winds up just being supplier centricity with a thin veneer of customer layered over the top, but to actually truly adopt a perspective or a lens or an approach of not being customer centric, but supplier agnostic. And when you engage customers from this supplier agnostic approach and perspective and sort of mentality, really interesting, sometimes counterintuitive, but sometimes and ultimately we believe very powerful commercial outcomes can happen.
At the core of the frame making mindset, which is this idea that our role as sellers and as sales organizations is to help customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. And that best decision is really from their perspective. It inherently has to be customer centric because it's so easy for all of us who are trying to sell something to kind of fall back into that trap of, well, what are we trying to achieve, and forget that what the customer is trying to achieve has to be first and foremost.
I think we'd all agree. And goodness knows, I've been guilty of this, right? The gravitational pull back to supplier centricity is incredibly strong because at the end of the day, sales is in the business of selling things, right? So at the end of the day, I think we'd all
Yep.
agree sales is not successful if we, at the end of the day, have not sold something, right? But in the world of sales, Carl, we'll talk about how to make sure we get paid for this in just a second. But let's just talk about how do we actually just make this happen at all, right? So when you adopt this mindset of how do we help customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible, first we have to kind of understand what does best mean, don't we?
There have to be some fairly objective criteria that help establish, again, based on the customer's perspective, what we're measuring against, what best really means, what's the metric, what's the target that that customer is trying to achieve.
But Carl,
And
how do you because I'm thinking about this a lot, and I'd imagine how this is going to go over for some people like a ton of bricks. There's kind of two challenges. Like, what if I think the best thing for you to do would clearly be to buy my solution? So there we are, right back to supplier centricity. I'd love you to talk about that, but also there's another aspect of this which feels almost a little paternalistic. I don't know if that makes sense, right? But it's like, who am I to decide what's best for you? And so I don't know if you could just share your thoughts because you're really smart on this. I'd just love to get your thoughts on both those points, if that's okay.
that's very kind, right? But I think at the core is this idea that we as sellers have the opportunity to see many, many buyers. And we see
Yeah.
some buyers who've bought our solutions succeed wildly, and some, if we're being really honest with ourselves, that have struggled a bit, right? And
Yeah.
so we have a real advantage over our customers to say, hey, what are the differences there? What are the places where we really are a great solution and we'll help them knock it out of the park? Or we're the ones that, man, that's the customer that after we sold it, we just struggled, and our customer experience and customer success, they all were just, swimming upstream the entire life of the engagement or the contract, just because it really wasn't a good fit. And it's that aspect of what are those kind of disqualifiers, right? We
Hmm.
in the workshops around these ideas, we get in this idea of the negative brainstorm, right?
Yeah.
What would be the thing that disqualifies this customer from actually our solution being the best one for them, right? Or from a customer's perspective, what is the key question that I need to answer in a certain way to make any given solution the right one, right? And if you think about all the questions across the buying journey that a customer needs to know to not only ask but get the right answer to, there'll end up only being a handful, and maybe even only one or two, that really will be the ones that determine what is that best solution for them, and really determine which path to go down. And this is the thing that's so critical for sellers to be armed with when talking with their customers. Because if as a seller, I know, hey, the critical thing is to know the customer's answer to this one question. And if the answer is A, it means, yep, we're the best answer and we can help them see that. And if it's B, it's like, nope, they're not ready to buy from us yet. Maybe they will at some point, but certainly right now, this is an opportunity that does not make a lot of sense for the customer. And so I should disqualify it.
And just to be clear, those questions could arise at sort of the problem, the solution, or the supplier level, correct? So in other words,
Absolutely.
there's like a hierarchy of disqualification, and it's
Yep.
disqualification not in the sense that like it's a bad company or anything. It's like they're just not in
No.
they're not in the right place for them to have a high likelihood of buying our solution because either yes, we solve this problem, and they maybe even identify that problem, but it's just not a high priority problem, or they don't agree that it's a problem, or if around solution I think a lot of disqualification happens really when I do it, not around us versus a competitor. It's more like you're not ready for this solution, right? It feels like that's like the ripe ground for really getting into disqualification. If I'm helping you make the best decision you can as little time as possible, I want to make sure that you're ready to go down the road that leads to that we're going to essentially help you go down, I guess, right? So there's, I'm going to help you get good at this thing, but if you're not ready to get good at that thing, if the groundwork, the infrastructure, the context is not ready, built to for you to realize the value of that solution, feels like you probably want to do that first. It's almost like an order of operations thing. Is that how you think about it
No,
too?
I think that's exactly right. And in many cases, especially if it's an emerging solution, if it's a relatively new solution or it's emerging technology or something like that, it
Yeah,
may be that the organization just doesn't have some of the infrastructure in place or some of the roles defined. They don't have a chief information security officer, example we reference with some frequency in the book. Maybe there's something specific that's missing that once they get in place, then the answer to that question changes, and then they'll be ready, and then they'll be kind of part of that ideal customer profile that we want to target our efforts towards.
so I get to exactly what you're talking about, right? And say, oh, and I realize, oh, maybe they're not ready. Do I just say, well, call me when you're ready, see ya, and it's like peace out, or do I play a role of sort of like what should I do? Maybe is the question as a seller in that
What
situation.
and that's the one, if you're armed with that question and that scenario plays out with one of like, hey, I figured out that this person isn't ready to do whatever it is, right? Maybe
Yeah,
they're just never going to be ready, or maybe they need to do these two or three things first, right? Then that's where, again, to be very honest with them and say, you know what, I don't think this is the right time for you to be considering this because you're going to want to put this, that, or the other in place. If you're looking for guidance on what that looks like, if you need to hire a CISO, here's what we've seen be the, kind of job descriptions, again, with the customers we work with that have had success there. Whatever it may be that they're missing, again, we as the sellers have this advantage of having seen other
yeah,
customers do that well. And we can certainly we can be the connector. We can make that relationship and say, hey, you want to talk to someone who did this well? I can certainly introduce you. Right. And so there is a
yeah.
role for the seller. It's more the, hey, I'm planting seeds that are playing the long game because I'm thinking about this not how I win now, but I've realized that this is a deal that I need to put less investment into now and plant seeds so at some point in the future when they're ready, I'm their first call and this closes fast.
In many ways, this is why this has to be done not just at the individual seller level, but the organizational level. Because honestly, if I'm an
Yeah,
individual seller, I'm not thinking the way you just described. I'm thinking like, how do I hit my number this quarter? And if it goes south and implementation because they weren't ready, that's kind of
yeah,
someone else's problem. Maybe success or account management, or but not my problem, right? So
yeah.
is that how you see it too, or is there a way for me as a seller to think like, no, even if I'm just thinking individually, this is probably still the right way to go.
As a seller, I would be pushing my manager, again, the broader sales organization to say, hey, what are the characteristics of a deal I should not be pursuing?
Yeah,
Right. Because,
yeah,
there's just so many stories of, again, sellers just spending so much time with the customer that even if we win, essentially everybody loses. Right.
yeah.
We've all been there. We've all experienced it. It's just pain all around. We spend so many, untold months, even years chasing these things, when there was just better opportunities to help customers make better decisions, that would have been the faster wins. Again, from a seller's perspective, are they going to have access to all of these disqualifying questions we're talking about? Some who've been around for a long time, absolutely, certainly leverage your own experience. But this is where often the challenge is to put it to your manager, put it to your sales organization. Hey,
In other places in the book and on these episodes, we talk about sort of what's the language you'd use to have that conversation, something we call the phrase that frames. But one or another, really what we're talking about today is less about the language, more about the posture. Like what is my role? What is my posture? Why do I even show up? And why would a customer want to talk to me? And the whole idea is that in a world where 75% of B2B buyers don't want to talk to sellers at all, um, but I will talk to someone who's a good coach, a good guide, someone who can help me kind of sort through this and figure out, is this even the right direction for me to go down? And I've got to believe, the only way for me to believe that you're the right person to talk to in that kind of context is to believe that there is actually a chance that you may tell me not to do this. And I think that's such an interesting way to think about your role, is less as I'm trying to sell this, rather I'm trying to help my customers make really good decisions. Even if in that world you lose that deal, if that's how you show up, if that's your posture, then you'll be the first one they call down the road when it comes time to make that next decision, or when they are ready to go down the road that you need them to go down. And I think that's ultimately where frame making becomes a story, not just of short-term deal wins, but also long-term growth. And that's the real power, I think.